The human made a proposal. The alien Empress smiled, and accepted. The first human ever invited to the Lithari throne world stood alone beneath a ceiling made of living crystal. The chamber was vast, quiet, and filled with soft light that changed color like a slow breath. Rows of alien nobles watched from raised platforms, their forms elegant and unfamiliar, their eyes sharp with ancient intelligence. At the center of the room sat the Empress of the Lithari Dominion, her throne grown from a single piece of starstone, smooth and perfect. Elias Wren did not wear armor. He did not carry a weapon. His clothes were simple by design, dark and practical, the kind worn by people who solved problems instead of creating them. His hands rested calmly at his sides, though his heart beat fast. Every human who had studied the Lithari knew this moment should not exist. No species had ever been granted a peaceful audience with the Empress. Most encounters ended long before words were exchanged. The Empress studied him in silence. Her form was tall and graceful, her skin glowing faintly like moonlight on water. Her eyes were old beyond measure, filled with memories of stars rising and dying. When she smiled, it was gentle and warm, and that smile had ended civilizations. "You may speak," she said at last, her voice smooth and clear, echoing through the chamber without effort. "You have traveled far for a single sentence." The Empress's smile widened slightly, amused. "A proposal," she repeated, "from a species whose borders touch ours by accident rather than design, from a civilization barely old enough to remember its first stars. Or you do not understand where you stand. You will have my attention until I decide you no longer deserve it. From the outside, it looks eternal. You solved survival so completely that you forgot growth. Our technology is uneven. Our governments fail often. By your standards, we are inefficient. Not a weapon design, not a star map. It was a web of connections, shifting and changing, lines forming and breaking. This is how humans build systems, he said. We allow failure. We reward disagreement. We expect things to break. When they do, we learn fast and rebuild differently. This, he said, is how your dominion works. Nothing breaks, nothing questions, nothing changes unless you allow it. Old answers solve only parts of new questions. Perfect systems struggle with imperfect futures. Research structures, decision loops that allow controlled disorder. Survival, he said honestly, and purpose. Do you know how many have stood where you stand? She asked. How many believe they had something unique to offer? Not because you threaten me, but because you are sincere. Controlled completely. We will, he said, and if it fails, we will learn why. And for the first time in centuries, the Lithari Dominion had agreed to change, not because it was forced to, but because a human had dared to ask it to. The days after the Empress accepted the proposal passed in a strange quiet. Elias Wren was given rooms within the inner city of the throne world, a place no outsider had ever lived before. The city itself was calm and flawless. Towers rose like smooth glass sculptures, streets cleaned themselves, and every system worked exactly as planned. Nothing was broken, nothing was wasted. To most species it would have looked like paradise. To Elias it felt still, too still. From his window he watched the movement below. Lithari citizens walked with purpose but without hurry. Drones glided in perfect paths. No one argued. No one questioned directions given by the Dominion's central systems. Every decision had already been optimized long before anyone needed to think about it. This is what they call peace, Elias murmured to himself. On the third day, he was summoned again, not to the throne chamber but to a circular hall deep beneath the palace. The walls were lined with floating symbols that shifted constantly, streams of information flowing like rivers of light. Waiting for him were 6 high administrators of the Dominion. They were not nobles or warriors. They were planners, analysts, and system keepers. At the center of the room stood the Empress. "You asked for a limited space," she said as Elias approached. "I have granted you one. Then it is ideal for learning." The administrators exchanged looks. Authority already exists, one replied, assigned by competence and adjusted by performance. Economic incentives that rewarded trying something new even if it failed. You reward failure, an administrator asked, clearly disturbed. We reward learning, Elias corrected. Failure is just one kind of data. I am watching closely. Local councils were allowed to suggest alternatives to central plans. Not orders, suggestions. At first, nothing happened. The Lithari had been trained for generations to trust the system. Suggesting a different path felt unnecessary, even rude. Human advisors waited patiently. Then a supply delay occurred. Minor but unexpected. Instead of waiting for central correction, a local logistics team proposed 3 possible solutions. All were imperfect. One was chosen. It worked. The second change involved resource allocation. Instead of perfect distribution, a small margin was left unassigned. Slack, the humans called it. This is wasteful, an administrator argued. This is flexibility, a human replied. Within weeks, that unused margin solved problems before central systems even detected them. The third change caused the most discomfort: open disagreement. Humans encouraged structured debate, not conflict but challenge. Meetings where junior analysts could question senior planners. At first, no one spoke. Silence filled the rooms. Then one voice did. The debate that followed was awkward, slow, and inefficient. It was also productive. From her throne, the Empress watched reports flow in. Small improvements at first, faster adaptation, unusual solutions, patterns the central systems had never predicted. One evening, she summoned Elias alone. "You are not doing what I expected," she said. "I hope that's a good thing," Elias replied. "I expected ambition," she said. "You do not seek control, you give it away." "My dominion was built to prevent collapse," she said quietly. "We saw too many empires fall to chaos." Local worlds started developing small cultural differences again: music, art, local traditions that had been optimized away long ago. This disturbed some administrators. Uniformity ensures stability, one argued. Diversity ensures survival, a human responded. The tension never became open conflict, but it grew. The Empress allowed it. Then came the unexpected problem. A neighboring non-dominion power experienced an economic collapse. Trade disruption rippled toward the test sector. Normally, the dominion would seal borders and wait it out. This time, local councils reacted first. They rerouted trade, shared surplus, and adapted pricing models on the fly. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but effectively. When the central system analyzed the situation, it found that the crisis had already passed. The Empress stared at the report for a long time. "That system did not ask permission," she said. "No," Elias replied. "It took responsibility." They added layers, soft ones, flexible ones, ones that allowed mistakes without collapse. Still, she was cautious. "You have shown promise," she told Elias during another private meeting. "But promise is not proof." A long-standing inefficiency in the sector's energy grid reached a tipping point. The central system predicted decades of gradual decline before intervention would be required. Human models disagreed. Local teams proposed experimental adjustments, risky ones. The administrators objected strongly. Failure would damage confidence, they warned. Elias did not argue. He simply asked the Empress to decide. She watched the simulations, perfect models against imperfect ones. "Proceed," she said at last. The changes were made, they failed. Energy output dropped briefly. Systems strained. Administrators prepared reports of blame. Then the secondary effects appeared. New feedback loops formed. Adjustments were made quickly. Lessons were applied in real time. Within weeks, the grid stabilized at a higher efficiency than before. The failure had taught them something the perfect system never could. The Empress stood before the great window of her palace, watching the stars. "You allowed them to fail," she said softly. "And they learned," Elias replied. She turned to him, her expression no longer amused, no longer testing. Other empires will notice this, she said. They already have, Elias said. The Empress smiled again, but this time there was no hidden threat in it. Continue, she said. I want to see how far this human way can go. And ideas, Elias knew, were the hardest things in the galaxy to contain. The change could no longer be called small. What began as a controlled experiment had become something visible across the Dominion. The test sector was no longer just efficient. It was alive. Elias Wren felt it every time he walked through its stations and cities. People talked more. They questioned processes. They argued politely, then laughed, then tried again. None of it looked dangerous, yet none of it fit the old patterns. From the highest towers of the throne world, the Empress watched the data streams grow more complex each day. The central system still functioned, still optimized, but now it had to listen. It received suggestions instead of silent compliance. It adjusted to unexpected solutions instead of predicting everything in advance. For the first time in her long rule, the future was not clear. That unsettled many within the Dominion. The resistance did not come from soldiers or rebels. It came from administrators, system keepers, those whose identities were built on perfection. To them, the human influence felt like noise slowly entering a carefully tuned song. During a closed council meeting, one administrator spoke what many had been thinking. These changes reduce clarity, they said. Outcomes are harder to predict. Authority is less defined. Adaptation speed is higher. You are changing my people, she said. Yes, Elias replied calmly, but not their loyalty. You speak as if collapse is inevitable. A diplomatic message from a neighboring power, polite, curious, concerned. They ask if the Dominion is weakening, the Empress said. Elias smiled faintly. Are you? Objections rose, measured but urgent. This increases risk, one warned. Good, the Empress replied. I wish to see how humans manage risk at scale. Elias traveled constantly, meeting local leaders, listening more than speaking. He did not issue commands, he asked questions. What would you change if you could? On one world, a research center abandoned a century-old process and developed 3 competing approaches instead of one. 2 failed quietly. The third succeeded beyond expectations. On another, a trade hub experimented with flexible schedules. Productivity dipped, then rose sharply as people adjusted their work to their strengths. Not everything improved. A cultural exchange program caused confusion. Art forms blended in unexpected ways. Some citizens felt disoriented, unsure of what it meant to be Lithari anymore. The Empress received reports of this as well. You are dissolving identity, an administrator warned her. No, she replied slowly. Identity that dissolves was already hollow. The true test arrived not from within but from outside. A long-distance communication burst reached the Dominion. A coalition of minor powers announced a shared economic initiative, one designed specifically to avoid reliance on large empires. They are reacting to us, an administrator said. They fear absorption. Do you deny influencing this? In the expanded human influence sectors, councils adapted immediately. They negotiated new terms, shared data openly, and adjusted production ahead of demand. In untouched sectors, responses were slower. The difference became impossible to ignore. For the first time, parts of the Dominion were outperforming the core. The Empress called another private meeting. You are creating unevenness, she said. Yes, Elias said, that's how growth begins. Do you believe humanity could defeat my Dominion? Human observers were granted limited access to the central system, not control but dialogue. Administrators protested strongly. You open the heart of the Dominion, they warned. I open its ears, the Empress replied. The interaction was careful at first. Human models questioned assumptions. The system responded with logic. They adjusted together. Something new emerged, not a human system. Not a Lithari one, but a hybrid, adaptable, predictive, curious. When the Empress reviewed its early performance, she felt a quiet awe. This changes everything, she said. It only begins things, Elias replied. Yet even as progress continued, tension grew. Some administrators began to withdraw cooperation. Subtle delays appeared. Information flowed less freely. Elias noticed. So does the Empress. She summoned the administrators, her voice calm but firm. You fear losing relevance, she said. You fear a future that does not need you as you are. For the first time since arriving, he felt the weight of what humanity had started. This was no longer a test sector. It was a turning point. The Empress joined him, silent for a moment. You have altered the balance, she said. Not with force, with trust. Which is why it is powerful. Across its vast territory, conversations were happening that would have been unthinkable only a few cycles earlier. Not loud arguments or public unrest, but quiet questions asked in meeting rooms, research halls, and transit hubs. People wondered why certain worlds adapted faster than others. They compared results. They noticed patterns. They noticed humans. Elias Wren felt the shift the moment his access privileges changed. He was no longer treated as a temporary observer. Doors opened automatically. Requests for guidance arrived faster than he could answer them. Lithari officials did not ask what humans wanted anymore. They asked how humans thought. That made Elias uneasy. Human history was full of moments where influence grew faster than wisdom. He reminded himself daily that he was not here to lead the Dominion. He was here to teach it how to lead itself differently. The Empress watched everything. From her position above politics and systems, she saw the pressure building like a slow tide. Success had brought attention. Attention brought imitation. Imitation brought fear. Other empires began to react. Diplomatic messages arrived one after another. Some were polite inquiries. Others were thinly hidden accusations. They asked whether the Dominion was spreading instability on purpose, whether these new adaptive systems were a form of influence, whether humanity was using the Dominion as a shield. The Empress read every message carefully. They believe control is slipping, she said during a private meeting with Elias. Control always slips, Elias replied. The question is whether you fall or learn to move with it. That's why it worked. It is about pride. They rely on emotion and individual judgment. Citizens from non-integrated sectors began requesting inclusion, not loudly, not through protest, through formal channels, through careful petitions that cited improved quality of life, faster problem-solving, and renewed cultural expression. The Empress read the first request twice, then a second arrived, then dozens. You did not plan this, she said to Elias. No, he admitted. Humans rarely control demand once people see options. A powerful neighboring empire announced new trade restrictions aimed at worlds using adaptive systems. The message was clear: conform or be isolated. The administrators urged caution. This is how influence becomes conflict, they warned. The Empress summoned Elias late one cycle, the palace quiet around them. They are testing us, she said. They are afraid, Elias replied. Of what? Instead, he spoke of transparency, shared data, voluntary participation, and letting results speak louder than declarations. They want control, the Empress said. Then show them what happens without forcing it, Elias said. She made her decision. The Dominion announced that participation in adaptive systems would remain voluntary. Data would be shared openly with any empire that wished to study it. No trade retaliation would occur. The reaction was immediate. Some empires dismissed the move as weakness. Others quietly requested access to the data. The neighboring empire maintained its restrictions, but found that alternative trade networks adapted quickly. Not perfectly, but enough. The pressure tactic lost its edge. Within the Dominion, the review concluded. The administrators presented their findings to the Empress in a formal session. Human-integrated systems outperform traditional models, the lead reviewer said. They carry higher short-term uncertainty but lower long-term risk. With oversight. Education shifted from memorization to exploration. Failure was discussed openly without shame. The Empress herself began to change. She spent less time issuing perfect directives and more time asking questions. She allowed debates in her presence. She listened. One evening, she admitted something she had never said aloud. "I ruled by certainty," she said. "Now I rule by curiosity." Human integrated sectors responded differently. Local teams coordinated without waiting for orders. They shared partial solutions, adjusted in real time, and accepted temporary inefficiencies to maintain momentum. The situation stabilized faster than any projection predicted. The Empress watched the final report in silence. "This would have taken decades to resolve before," she said. "Yes," Elias replied, "because no one would have been allowed to try anything uncertain." Humanity stood between them not as a ruler but as an example. Elias knew the final stage was approaching. When systems changed enough, questions of legacy followed. One night, as stars drifted slowly past the palace windows, the Empress spoke the question that had been waiting. "What place does humanity want in the future we are creating?" Not a throne. Change came in small moments, quiet decisions, and slow realizations that something old no longer fit the future. The Lithari Dominion felt this more clearly than anyone. It was no longer defined by flawless order alone, but by its ability to respond, adapt, and listen. At the center of it all stood the Empress. For the first time in her long reign, she did not feel the need to see every possible outcome before acting. She trusted the systems she had allowed to grow, and more importantly, the people within them. Elias Wren sensed that his role was nearing its end. Human advisors were no longer unusual. They worked beside Lithari planners as equals, sometimes leading, sometimes following. Many of the questions that once came to Elias now found answers without him. That, he knew, was success. One final challenge remained. A gathering unlike any before was announced. The Empress invited representatives from across the Dominion and beyond it to witness a demonstration of the adaptive systems. Not a display of power, a display of process. Some arrived curious, some arrived skeptical. A few arrived openly distrustful. The hall chosen for the gathering was wide and open, its walls transparent, showing the stars beyond. No guards stood in visible ranks. No symbols of dominance filled the space. The Empress entered without ceremony. She looked over the assembled delegates and began to speak. "For centuries," she said, "the Dominion offered certainty, stability, protection from collapse. Many accepted this gladly, others feared it. A complex scenario was presented: overlapping trade disruptions, environmental strain, and cultural tension across multiple systems. No single solution was offered. Instead, the process was shown. Multiple teams worked in parallel. Ideas conflicted. Data flowed openly. Adjustments were made in real time. Some approaches failed quickly and were abandoned without blame. Others evolved. The observers watched as the system adapted, not perfectly but effectively. A delegate from a rigid empire spoke up. "This seems inefficient." Some delegates left unconvinced, others requested data. A few asked questions that revealed something deeper than politics. "How do you keep control?" one asked. The Empress answered honestly, "I do not, I keep direction." Some civilizations tightened their systems, rejecting uncertainty. Others experimented cautiously. A few embraced change fully. Humanity did not lead these movements. They supported them. Elias received messages from Earth, reports of similar systems being adopted at home, refined by lessons learned in the Dominion. Humanity was changing too, influenced by the calm depth of Lithari thought. It was a shared evolution. One quiet evening, the Empress summoned Elias for what would be their final private meeting. "You will be leaving soon," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "You no longer need me here." Never demanded protection, never tried to rule. "That is not a guarantee," she noted. "No," Elias agreed, "but it is a promise we will keep trying to honor." a human ship leaving the throne world without fanfare, yet its impact echoed. Years passed. The Dominion continued to evolve. It was no longer feared as an unstoppable force but respected as a living system. Its influence spread through example, not pressure. The Empress ruled still, though her rule looked different now. She listened more than she spoke. She allowed uncertainty into her councils. She encouraged questions. Historians would later argue about the exact moment everything changed. Some pointed to the test sector, others to the first failure that was allowed to stand. Most agreed it began with a single human making a proposal that was not about taking, but about becoming. Humanity's place in the galaxy became clear over time. They were not conquerors, they were not saviors, they were catalysts. Where humans went, systems questioned themselves. Not because humans forced them to, but because they showed another way to exist. The Empress, looking out over a galaxy that felt wider and more alive than ever before, allowed herself a small smile. She had ruled through certainty. She would be remembered for choosing change. And somewhere among the stars, humanity continued doing what it had always done best: learning, adapting, and helping the universe do the same.